Every morning we're going to have a short devotional, so we can have some, because now, yesterday we had a good time. I think today and the next days will be tougher, so we might need some encouragement in the morning. So I asked Pastor Stan to be, he will be the good guy, I will be the bad guy. You know, like in movies, you have the bad cop and the good cop. He will be the good cop, I will be the bad cop. And so he will do the devotional this morning, and Pastor DeVries will do tomorrow's devotional. So it's all yours.
Okay, test. Oh, there it is. How would I know I'm supposed to press the button? You didn't tell me you wanted an encouraging message, Pastor. I have to change it now. Okay. Yeah, actually, this would be, that's good. Okay, good. Matthew 6, just for a few moments this morning. Matthew 6. There's a verse that in Matthew 7. I'm reading from the English Standard Version. It's not heretical, I promise you. But if you're reading from another version, please forgive me. Matthew 7 and verse 14, "For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few." These verses, verse 13 and 14 of Matthew 7, entering by the narrow gate, and for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction. Those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. These verses are very often used in a very legalistic way, but I wanted to just look at the context here, just very, very briefly covering a lot of verses, but just thinking about these things. Reading, we're not going to read it all of Matthew 6 and 7, but just like at the very beginning of Matthew 6, just to look at the context of where is this verse encountered. The beginning of Matthew 6 speaks of giving, and really giving by grace. Grace giving, speaking about like when you give to the needy, don't sound no trumpet before you as the hypocrites do, but just he says they have received their reward. But when you give to the needy, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. In other words, just grace giving. And then in from verse 5 to 13 of Matthew 6, he talks about prayer. Jesus speaks about prayer. And he speaks about prayer not as the hypocrites, but an unfeigned prayer, a non-pretentious prayer. And as you read it, you realize that this unfeigned prayer is due to orientation to grace, to just us, that we have received what we don't deserve to receive. And then he talks about forgiveness, and from verse 14, forgiving, and this is grace orientation as well. And then in verse 19, he says, "Don't lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where earth and moth destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." And so this speaks of thinking in grace. So we have grace giving, unfeigned prayer because of grace orientation, forgiveness due to grace, obviously because nobody deserves to be forgiven, grace thinking. Then in verse 22, he says, "The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light." It's grace vision, like seeing by grace. Then in verse 25, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life." And he goes into a lot of reasons why we shouldn't be anxious. Just look at the flowers, look at, the birds. So basically what he's saying here is expect grace. Just expect grace. Then in chapter 7, in verse 1, he says, "Judge not, that you be not judged." And not going to read the whole portion, but basically it's impute grace, right? So just go review again, grace giving, unfeigned prayer because of grace orientation, forgiveness because of grace, which is not merited, thinking with grace, grace vision, seeing with grace, expecting grace for ourselves, and then imputing grace to others. Don't judge, but impute grace. And then in verse 7, he says, "Ask, and it will be given. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened. Everyone who asks receives." Right then at the end of this part, he says, "If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him?" So this is just seeking grace. When you speak to God, just seek grace. And then the so-called golden rule, right? So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. So this is basically just give grace. So, grace giving, grace orientation, grace forgiveness by grace, grace thinking, grace vision, expecting grace, imputing grace, seeking grace, giving grace. And then comes this verse, right? Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide. So it's like, do we think that that Jesus is now like just all of a sudden he's like shifting gears and like, okay, that was enough about grace? Because actually, like if you go back, if you look at the verses after this, he talks about the false prophets who are inwardly are ravenous wolves. Like, in other words, like ungrace. And then he goes and he even talks about the tree, the healthy tree, grace results, right? And then the people who are not who say like, "Lord, Lord," but he says, "I never knew you," so they never received grace. And then in verse 24, he talks about the wise man builds on the rock. So this is the grace foundation, which we read in 1 Corinthians 3. That Paul said, like, I as the master architect laid the foundation by grace, the foundation Jesus Christ by grace. And then at the end of chapter 7, he speaks about the authority of Jesus, which was the authority of grace. So why do we think that in the middle of all of this grace, everything, that this narrow way, what is this narrow way? And and it's narrow. It's the words narrow. Well, in this version, narrow. It's the word narrow. The gate is narrow. The word is stenos. It means that it's narrow because of it's obstructed. There's obstructions in the way because Satan doesn't want us to find this way. And hard is the word thlibo, and it means like afflicted. That there is tribulation in this way. So basically, this is a grace way. Like that's like in the middle of all of the context that we have here. This narrow gate and the hard way is the way of grace. It's the gate of grace. It's the way of grace. It's grace thinking. So, and this is when we think this way. It's like the devil doesn't want us to think this way. That's why it's obstructed. There are afflictions on the way, so that because the afflictions even also cause us to because we realize when we're afflicted how much we need the grace of God. When there are obstructions, we see there's obstructions because this way of grace is being resisted by the enemy. So we're very grateful for grace, and we must continue to think this way and expect it for ourselves and give it to others, and understand in Romans 6:14 that we are no longer under law, but that we are indeed under grace, and therefore sin has no dominion. So we're not under the authority of sin simply because we are under grace.
Okay, thank you very much, Pastor Stan. So that was the good cop, and now comes the bad cop. Somebody has to do the dirty job, right? Make you work. So, so this morning we're going to start a whole new, I was going to say whole new era, but not that much. I mean, but the whole new chapter on our study. So far we've been doing some, we've laid some foundations for a biblical understanding of what is apologetics. And there is one more verse I would like for us to consider, and we're just going to look at it in a minute. So if you want to turn with me, where is it? It's here. Psalm 11, verse 3. Psalm 11, verse 3. Did we pray for the class? I don't know. Pastor Stan prayed for his devotional, so it's good for the class. So Psalm 11, verse 3, and that's just to sum up what we said yesterday. You remember when we spoke about the important foundations that we need to have in our theology that needs to be imported in a way in our apologetics. There needs to be a coherence between the theology and the way we develop methods and understanding of apologetics. And we said yesterday that basically, if I don't include everything I know in theology in my understanding of apologetics, I'm developing an incoherence between what I do on Saturday in the outreach and what I preach on Sunday morning in the church. So, and this verse actually sums up what we've been saying. So Psalm 11, verse 3 says, when the foundations are being destroyed, what can the righteous do? And that's very interesting because the foundations, I take it from what we've said yesterday about the importance of the biblical foundations for apologetics. Now, if we don't have biblical foundations for apologetics, even the righteous needs to wonder what he can do. So not only the unbeliever has no foundations, but if we come and you recall our discussions yesterday on 1 Corinthians 1, remember we went from verse 18 to 31st verse, asking, what is Paul laying as foundations for biblical methods of apologetics. And he's saying, several times that man in his wisdom did not know God. So if man was not able to know God, then we need to lay the foundations that are different for them to be able to know God. It's just like, I mentioned quickly emerging church yesterday. What the basic foundation of the emerging church, for those who know about it, the basic idea, and I think the first book that founded the idea of emerging church was written by Brian McLaren called The Church on the Other Side. And that book basically says the reason why people don't come to church is because Christians are not attractive. So it sounds appealing thinking, maybe I should have a better attitude, and we said it yesterday. But if people don't come to church, maybe it's because they don't like the church. But maybe they don't like the church because they don't want the church for their life also. So it's not just the church is bad. It's maybe they are actually revealing something that the people don't want to have in their life. So when I don't include a theological thinking in my mind, I don't know that there is a rebellion in the world against the Word of God, then I will have to change my church. And my church will look like the world, and people will come, but the message will not be there anymore. And it's the same thing with apologetics. If Paul is right, and we believe he's right, by saying that man in his own wisdom was not able to know God, if I use the same methods, then I won't be able to have men know God either. So that's the question that the psalmist asks right now. When the foundations are being destroyed, what can the righteous do? What can we do in apologetics if we don't have any biblical foundations? So, and actually the funniest thing is that if you read Brian McLaren, I don't recommend you do because there's nothing really interesting in there, but he actually speaks in his first book on how to lay down foundations for a new apologetics. This is why I read the book actually. And this is the exact opposite of what we've been saying for a couple days. So this is very interesting. Okay, so now we're going to enter into a new chapter. And we're going to see some faces on the screen. Oh. Here we go. Look at these French philosophers. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to do three things this morning. Number one, we just want to go like a brief, short historical presentation of what atheism is. Number two, we want to talk about atheism today. And number three, we want to ask the questions whether or not atheism is that new, because people are talking about the new atheism. And we just want to assess that a little bit and wonder, is atheism that new? That's one of the questions we need to look into quickly as we're going to study today. So this is done. Okay, just a few things. So you have on the screen a few guys. And these basically, before we talk about them, the word atheism comes from a Greek word. Let's put it this way. I transcribe it for you. It's a Greek word, and so for the ones who can read Greek, this is your Greek version. Atheos means without God, literally, or no God, or some people are actually thinking atheism is rather an anti-theism rather than atheism, and I think today's atheism is more anti-theism than atheism, really, especially with the new atheism. So that words go way back because we had the word already in the ancient Greek writings. So atheism is not related to the Christian faith only. It was actually a word that was used by the Greek philosophers for those who didn't believe there was something beyond the universe. But atheism, as we read yesterday, you remember we spoke about, we read Psalm 14 verse 1, in which we said the fool says in his heart there is no God. So atheism really in the mindset goes way back because it's centuries before Christ also that the Bible also speaks about atheism in a way, thinking there is a foolishness in people who are thinking that there is no God. So let me go through with you just a few historical specific dates that will help us understand what happens and what we had in history. Number one, what you need to know is basically atheism as we know it today comes from a period in France, sorry about that, but the French Revolution and what we call the Enlightenment century, being the 18th century. And the reason why it's very important for us to know that, because we see a progression in the European history about atheism. Before, everybody was kind of Christians. I don't know how much they were really, but actually nobody was openly, atheist, and nobody was really openly making any other statement but I am a Christian. And what happened during the French Revolution and during the Enlightenment century is that there was a rejection of the kings and the monarchy. And the reason why is because what we call, the peasant and the people that were not noble, birth or any kind of of special, family lived in a very poor life. So there was a rejection of the monarchy. And what happened actually, at that time, the Catholic Church was dominant in France and in Europe also, was very much supportive of the regime of the kings. And because of that, when they rejected monarchy, they rejected the church and God also, because they thought that both of them, church and God, was supportive of the kings. And remember what we said yesterday, we spoke quite a long time about the attitude as a Christian. And in a way, if we go back to Brian McLaren, he's right sometimes that the church, if the church would have a different attitude, then the world would react differently. Sometimes, not every time. But I think this is a very interesting point to note that at the time of the French Revolution, because of the attitude of the Catholic Church, mainly the Protestant Church were not targeted by the revolutionaries, but the Catholic Church was targeted by thinking, okay, if the Church is supportive of the king's regime, that means that God is supportive too. And if he is, God is not for the people, then he's okay with us starving to death. And having that so in the mind, and people were ready to accept atheism as an option, because if we get rid of the king's regime, then we have to have another regime. And how does the new regime will include or exclude religion? And this is the decision that was made right at the time. So it would be false to say that those guys, Voltaire, Diderot, and Rousseau, were actually atheists. They were not atheists, philosophers. And actually, when you read the letters between Voltaire and Rousseau, mainly, they were accusing each other of being atheists. So they were more like deists, philosophers. They thought that God was at the origin of the universe. He created the world, but he's not interested into it. And really, there is no plan of redemption because God doesn't care. And he's distant, and he has nothing to do with man. And depending what kind of deist you are, you think it's because of sin. Some others because think God is distant just because of who he is. Right? He created us, and he leaves us alone, and he does something else. Or these things that God leaves us alone because we decided to live in sin, and he doesn't want to have anything to do with us. So when you hear some people saying, those guys were atheists, this is not true. They were concerned by the attitude of the church. They were concerned by the attitude of the church supporting the kings and the monarchy, but they were not atheists. And this is very important because sometimes you will find people who have maybe well learned in philosophy and they learn the history of philosophy. They will quote Voltaire and Rousseau and Diderot saying, these guys, we did not believe in God. Well, this is not the case. They did believe in God. Just they understood God differently than we do. And obviously, deism is not theism. There is a difference because there is the idea of redemption doesn't have any meaning for many of them. So you have the dates. So they are pretty much, contemporary. It's how we say it. Okay. But Voltaire is the first one who actually connected the growing numbers of unbelievers and the corruption in the church. In his early writings, he said that the reason why we have a growing number of unbelievers or atheists is because of the attitude of the church, the corruption in the church. So he's the first one who made the connection. So again, I don't think this is a true sociological assessment of reality, because again, if the Bible is true, and it is, then man also have his own decisions. Rebellion in the heart is also an explanation why there is a growing number of unbelievers. But there is a connection historically, and he's the first one who made the connection. Diderot and Rousseau, they actually were known because of their large amount of writings that they did through the centuries, through their century where they were living in the 18th century. And one of the encyclopedia that Rousseau wrote was 17 volumes. That's a lot of volumes for one guy. And this writings, 17-volume encyclopedia from Rousseau, is still in French libraries a reference as history of philosophy. So it had an impact and still have an impact today. So those three guys actually, they laid down the foundations for what we will see later as atheism becoming an intellectual force that was not able to be there before. So there was no strength or momentum in atheism before the French Enlightenment period. And it became a momentum because of the first writings of those philosophers. Okay? And then a little later, you have this guy who is not as known, but he's the first one who actually wrote openly his position as an atheist in a book called The System of Nature, Système de la Nature. And he wrote that he believed that there was no God. And he actually wrote, and the idea of system of nature is to show that the nature does not need God. And he's the first one who wrote that clearly. And his book was published in 1770. And he clearly, so he was looking forward to revolution, and he actually died a few days before the Bastille Day.
Can you make it a little bit larger in the text?
Can I? Don't see the date. Can I do that? I am. Look at this. Wow. But you don't see his beautiful face. Oh, look at him. He seems to be a good person, I guess. Yeah, if you remember his last name, it's good enough. If you don't remember his last name, it's okay. Just know he's the first one who wrote openly, at least in Europe, that he was atheist. So when the revolution came in 1789, the French Revolution came, there was enough writings and enough philosophical support for atheism to become an option. And that's what's become interesting. It was an option for the poor people. And this is when, where is my good friend? I forgot Karl Marx. Well, I didn't put Karl Marx on my, so let's put it this way. This is when the famous Karl Marx arrives. His dates are these. Remember what I said about the sociological situations of the poor people. Now, remember what's happening. So we are at day -1 of French Revolution. Voltaire is writing about the corruption in the church, and he's saying this is why we have a growing number of atheists. The news spreads, philosopher writes, Diderot, Rousseau, they write about, and extensively their day's position, explaining that, and attacking the corruption in the church, which I think they had the right to do, obviously. And then von Holbach wrote openly that atheism was an option. And then here we are, we're about to get rid of the kings, and now we're going to think of what's next. Well, what next will be some kind of democracy that didn't last very long. And number two, what are we doing with religion? But what are we developing? What kind of society do we want? And this is where Karl Marx comes in. Everybody knows that Marxism is, Karl Marx is the father of communism. You say communism? Communism. Not communism. Communism. And so he will provide the practical dimension on how a society without God will work. So you see there is a progression, you're seeing it, right? So we're coming with Karl Marx, and he comes up with the idea that it's possible to have a society without God. Let me show you how it is. And so he will come up with practical solutions on how to think life with each other, there is no society level, there is no castes, everybody is on the same level, and we don't need God because we know how bad God is, right? He was supportive of the kings. God is the God of the rich, and obviously we don't want that. So little by little, we move on with the very famous David Hume, and David Hume actually insisted that in science and epistemology, two words might some of you don't know maybe. Who knows what epistemology means? What is epistemology? Yeah, a theory of knowledge, or the study of knowledge. How we know what we know, how can we know that we know is true? How can we know the truth? How much can we know the scope of knowledge we can have? The authority of knowledge, all these things are in the realm of epistemology. And David Hume developed a new kind of epistemology, because before, if you understood epistemology as a Christian, it is that the final authority is God, and most of our knowledge comes from the revelation. Everything we know from God and we know from the truth of the universe comes from Him as a revelation. That's our epistemology. And science, obviously, is another way to know, but it did not come, it was not a religion, like, in a way, like David Hume will bring by making a point by saying that the only way for us to know things for sure is through our sense perception, my experience, and this is what we call empiricism. And he developed the idea, and actually he opened the way for what we call today scientism. Scientism is a religious application of science, meaning science is a great thing. I think there is room for empirical data, there is room for science. As we discussed yesterday, science doesn't have the final say on everything, though science thinks it has the final say on everything. And when people think that science has the final say on everything, then we enter into scientism. And he opened the way, David Hume opened the way for scientism, thinking that the only way to establish things is by empirical data. Now, can we prove God with empirical data? We don't. So yeah, now you start to see how this will serve the atheist agenda. In a way, what David Hume is saying is not all wrong. I mean, he's making some points. He actually laid down some rules for science, which were very interesting. But when he applied science rules outside of science, this is where the problem comes in, right? As we said yesterday about the breakfast idea, if you want to know what I ate for breakfast this morning, I think science can do that. Some way, you can enter in my stomach and make some analysis, and you will know what I ate. Sorry about that. But if you want to know what I ate 10 years ago for breakfast, that's a whole different realm of study. Science will not be able to do that. So we need another investigation, and the investigations will be history, and that's another science. Did we have any witness? Do you have any video recording? Anybody remembers? Do you have pictures? What is it, the special day? All these things will gather, data that will help us investigate whether what I ate 10 years ago for breakfast. Not that it is that interesting, but the point. So science has an important role in life, but it doesn't have 100% of the reality. And unfortunately, this is what David Hume made us think. And then we come with another philosopher. You look at his beautiful face before I show you his name and date, Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant agreed with David Hume in a way by thinking, yes, science is important, but he's thinking we need to make that more precise. He did not agree with David Hume when he developed what we call skepticism, that we cannot know things for sure. Right? We can have our sense perceptions, we can even never trust our sense perception. This is empiricism plus skepticism. So, where can I write my skepticism here? Come on.
Can you repeat what you said about Immanuel Kant?
Yes. So, Hume, he brought empiricism and skepticism. And Kant agreed with David Hume on empiricism, but he did not agree with David Hume on skepticism. And if you study Kant, I mean, you don't have to, and but I'm saying if you do, then you will learn that Kant divided reality into two realms, one that he called the noumenal realm, and the other one was the phenomenal. Realm. Who knows the definitions of both? Who studied Kant? I'm sure some of you don't. David, I don't know, Pastor Dave knows. Okay, so the difference is actually there is a realm that you can access, and there is a realm that you cannot access. And the realm that you cannot access is the realm where God is. So empiricism is actually accepted by David Hume by thinking, yes, we can trust our sense perceptions, unlike David Hume who thought that you cannot do that. I mean, you can in a way, but it's limited. And he thought everything that is in the sense perception realm can be accepted. And as authority, we can think this is, we can go with this. But, and by doing this, Immanuel Kant, funny enough, wanted to save science by giving authority to empiricism, and he wanted to save faith by saying that God is in a different realm. But by doing that, he actually was used by atheists later to think that God is not reachable and you cannot know him. So by developing his philosophy, this is not what he thought for himself, but developing his philosophy, he gave fuel for atheism to think that anyway, if God exists, he will never be able to be known by us. This is not what Kant thought. This is what the atheists after Kant thinking. And actually, you know, if you spend time studying Kant a little bit, you will discover that all the specialists of Kant don't agree of what Kant meant, really. He's so complicated that the interpreters of Kant don't agree what he meant. The only thing we can agree is that he separated reality into realms. And one is attainable, the other one is not. So everything that is beyond our sense perception, including God, cannot be known with certainty. We can only guess. And that's what he said about reality. And then we come to another guy that you actually, he doesn't like as much a nice face than the other guys, Nietzsche. And Nietzsche thought that he buried God by announcing his death. But again, let me correct something. He did not think that God was dead. He announced in his novel that God was dead to explain the consequences of the death of God. People think that actually he thought that God was dead, but he actually was assessing the reality of what happens in society. We killed God, and this is what's going to happen now. So I don't even know if Nietzsche was an atheist or if he was a believer. I mean, it's hard to say because he wrote philosophy many times as novels rather than direct philosophy manuals. But what we know about this is that he actually clearly seen that now that God is dead, not literally, but he's dead in society, this is what's going to happen, really. And he announced his death, you know, in his famous writings that I'm sure you all heard about, but we don't want to spend so much time onto this because I want to move on. But his idea being that God isn't really dead, but man lives as though he's free from God. That's the idea. So now we are free from God, and now what's going to happen? So it's like a double language. On the one side, he's thinking, okay, well, now that God is dead, let's move on. And the other way, that where we're moving on is kind of dangerous too, because without God, you know, we don't know what reality will become. Again, not that God is literally dead, but he's dead for us. And that's very important. And then we have a good friend. Who knows this guy? Charles Darwin. Doesn't he have a nice beard? It's crooked. Charles Darwin. So he's the father of evolution theory, as everybody knows. Though he was a believer. And he will provide the argument for atheism to develop an alternate cause of the universe. That is very interesting because you see how progressive the thinking comes. You know, we had somebody who criticized the church, made some writings, you know, on how for deist philosophy, who opened the way, you know, for Karl Marx, who developed a society that would be without God. And then we're entering now into some scientific, you know, discussions with David Hume and Immanuel Kant. And then we have Nietzsche, who said that God is dead. Now, what can we do? And now we have Charles Darwin, who involuntarily, with you know, who actually will open the door to give an alternative explanation for the origin of the universe. Everybody thought that God created the world. Now, with Darwin, we have an option. Or maybe God did not create the world. Maybe we evolved. And so he actually gives scientific grounds to explain away the necessity of God for the origin of the universe, which obviously doesn't make any sense. We know that. I mean, if you study the apologetics, you know a little bit that even if evolution was 100% true, it would not disprove God anyway. It would disprove, if it was true, the Genesis account of creation. But still, we need some kind of origin for the universe and matter at first. So that does not disprove God in any way, but at least it provides atheism and its philosophy an alternative cause of the universe by thinking, okay, maybe we don't need God. Maybe, you know, humanity can have its explanation through evolution. Then we have another guy. Who knows this one? Sigmund Freud. He has nice glasses. So Sigmund Freud provided another explanation that now will explain why, since we don't need God to explain our origin, so God does not exist, let me tell you why you believe in God. There is a psychological reason why you do that. So Sigmund Freud comes at a point where he actually provides psychological explanations of the belief in God. All right, you know, whatever it is, it's like it's the finishing touch, you know, of a scientific quote unquote reason for the belief in God. The psychology is the science, quote unquote, that explains the belief in God. You know, let me tell you why you believe in God, because your mommy was not nice when you were a kid. This is why you believe in God. So, and you know, Sigmund Freud was not very accepted when he first wrote his thinking, because nobody thought there was such a thing as psychology. It was not a science. And even today, actually, I don't know if it's the case in America, but in France there is a big movement against psychology. It comes back because, and psychiatry also. There is a thick book that came out by two psychiatrists called the Black Book of Psychiatry. And it's actually coming back to the idea that after you know, over 100 years of studies of psychiatry and psychology, we have not made any progress. And actually, you know, they are not Christians, though. They're encouraging for a different kind of psychiatry. But as Christians, we are actually hearing that and thinking, yes, if you mix the mind, thinking the mind and the brain are two same things, then obviously your psychiatry will not meet the needs of man, because mind and brain are two things. The brain is physical, the mind is spiritual in a sense. It's immaterial. Yes, man is more complex than just having a brain that includes everything in there. So if you think that medication will help, you know, solve every problem, then you will have some more problems. So, okay, there is one more guy that I want to talk about. Is this guy? So, Charles Taylor, he's a Canadian philosopher. Don't worry, he's not that bad. And he said, if you read, you know, his book is The Secular Age, sums up the history of atheism in 3 steps. Number 1, there was a time before the Enlightenment when it was impossible not to believe in God. Okay? Then a time after the Enlightenment when it was possible not to believe in God. And 3 steps, a time, thanks to secularization, when it was impossible to believe in God. So you see, it's slowly where we are now today. It was impossible not to believe in God. It became possible not to believe in God. And now it's impossible to believe in God. And this is what he calls the secular age. So what he said is actually very interesting, because we are entering now into a new era where we find those 4 guys, actually 3, because Christopher Hitchens died recently of cancer. And you know how they call themselves? The 4 horsemen. That rings a bell for the Revelation. And they used to, I mean, it's not somebody who labeled them this way, they call themselves the 4 horsemen of Revelation. So you have Christopher Hitchens on the left, and then Daniel Dennett, who's American, Richard Dawkins, who's English, and Sam Harris, who's American too. And those 4 guys are known as what we call the new atheism. And the difference between now and then is that the aggressivity, the violence that comes out from atheism. Before, atheism was tolerant, we can say that. You know, I don't believe in God, you believe in God, let's make it even. You know, we're even. Now they won't let you. You know, if you read some quotes that I don't have with me, because I didn't think it was going to be good morning if I quote Richard Dawkins too much. But I do have one quote from Richard Dawkins. This is, I quoted yesterday, remember? And this is how much he thinks that, you know, there should not be tolerance in this world. It's absolutely safe to say that if you meet somebody who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane, or wicked. But I'd rather not consider that. And if you want to know the reference, he wrote an article that called "Put Your Money on Evolution" in the New York Times. I think it was 1989, and this is where the quote comes from. So the point being is that the new atheism is different. Some time ago, you could be a believer, and we could argue, we could discuss. You all read, at least if you're a credit student, you read Chesterton. When Chesterton had debates, when his debates were over, he would go to the pub and have a beer with his opponent. You know, not that we want to do that, but he was one of his best friends was Bernard Shaw. who is one of his most opponents in the book. And so it was a different era. You could talk, and they would respect you. And Chesterton was very well respected. He wrote articles for secular, newspapers, and he voiced very easily his opinions as a Christian. And he was never, he was opposed for that, but he was opposed on the fair level. Now, fairness is gone. It's not a time to be fair. The new atheism, what marks the difference is the violence. And this is how C.S. Lewis sums it up. And he says, the ancient man approached God, or even the gods, as the accused person approaches his judge. For the bounded man, the roles are reversed. He is the judge, and God is in the dock. I don't know if you read this collection of essays, God in the Dock, from C.S. Lewis. This is where the quote comes from. God is in the dock. He's quite a kindly judge. If God should have a reasonable defense for being the God who permits war, poverty, and disease, he's ready to listen to it. Man is ready to listen to God, right? Okay, what do you have to say for your defense? And that's a different attitude. The trial may even end in God's acquittal, but the important thing is that man is on the bench and God is in the dock. Meaning that, and we know that there is no fair trial. If you read Sam Harris, or if you read Richard Dawkins, or Christopher Hitchens, you know there is no fair trial. It doesn't happen. And the reason why is because now the time of being nice with those Christians is over. Being tolerant is over. Why? And we agree with one thing, is that they don't believe that pluralism makes sense. They don't believe that relativism makes sense. The reason why they don't, and actually doesn't make sense, the reason why they don't and why they voice it is because when they think they've proven that Christianity is wrong, then relativism being wrong also, Christianity will be taken care of. And actually, Richard Dawkins thinks personally, and he wrote it several times, that if you, in a Christian family, if you teach your children creation, at some point government should be able to take your kids away from you, because you're actually brainwashing them. And this is something that if he had his final say, this is what he would recommend. So the time of tolerance is over. Now it's more a battling time. So it's not that they really have an argument really. When you I don't know who read one of those four writers. I know you did. You did too. I know just a few of us. You did too. What struck me, when I was studying at that seminary a few years ago, I was doing a degree on apologetics. I was asked to read one of the French philosopher. His name is, not that it matters, but so if you want to have the reference, you can. We have our own Richard Dawkins in France, and his name is Michel Onfray. What a nice name. And he wrote a book that you could translate by atheology, which is a theology for atheists. Two things when I read the book. Number one, I never found an atheology in the book. I only found criticism of Christianity. So criticizing some opposition doesn't build another position. We know that. And number two, I was amazed, I told you yesterday, how well the guy can write. I think, to me, he's one of the best writers that I've read for decades. He has an amazing pen. He knows, how to. He has perfect words, anything. But these perfect words, just like the sophists that were facing Paul at some point, they were interested in saying things the right way, but not saying anything that was meaningful. Like, you have the truth or you don't have the truth doesn't matter. It's how well you say it. And I think this is exactly the same case with the new atheists that we quoted earlier. They don't really have a strong argument, because to have a strong argument, that would mean that they are right. And if they are wrong, then they cannot have a strong argument. Who can have a strong argument against truth? How can you make that? The only way to have a strong argument against truth is to make it strong, or to make it look like it's strong. But if a strong argument exists against truth, then truth is not truth. Are you following me? If I make an argument that is conclusive against something, then what the thing I'm arguing against is not true. So if Christianity is true, then no argument against it should be strong. Now it looks like it's strong because it's backed up, and especially with the four of them, it's backed up with science. Okay, we are trying to prove that, back it up, and we go back to what we said with, scientism and empiricism. If we can prove it scientifically, let's take, for example, Sam Harris. He's a neuroscientist. And he made some, all kind of MRIs and studies and scans to show that, the belief system that we have is actually a brain issue. When somebody prays, this part of the brain is active. Somebody worships, this part of the brain is active. Somebody thinks about God, this other part of the brain is active. So it proves that actually the brain is the reason why we believe in God. Well, he actually makes an assumption. So, backs it up with nice images of MRIs, actually proves the point, right? So he has a strong argument according to the scientific mindset. But number one, we need to challenge the idea that science has anything to say, because the first assumption that he makes without proving anything in the books that he wrote, The Moral Landscape, for example, is that man is only material. How do you know that? Maybe what you see in the brain is actually a reaction on the material level of what's happening on the immaterial level. You don't know that. But you're making an assumption that's the only thing there is. So that assumption actually looks like a strong argument. God does not exist. I can show you it's a mechanical and biological reaction. No, you're showing me that there is a mechanical or biological reaction, but you don't know where it comes from. You cannot show that. And the very idea of science and being unable to answer the question is basically because we believe that man is not only material, he's also immaterial. So what I'm saying by that is that they don't really have an argument, and the argument that they have actually is not very strong when you think about it. So we had this, and then let's see what Chesterton has to say about this. And I think he came up with a great understanding of what's going on in the world. It says, most of the machinery of modern language is labor-saving machinery, meaning that the words we are using, we're thinking for you, right? And it saves mental labor very much more than in art, meaning that the words I am are so loaded, I'm doing the work for you, I'm writing the books for you, you don't have to think. If you buy Sam Harris, then you're good to go. All right? If you buy Richard Dawkins, you don't have to think for yourself. It's all there. We've done the machinery for you. Scientific phrases are used like scientific wheels and piston rods to make swifter and smoother yet the path of the comfortable. So we are here like the machine is there to make it easy for you, right? It's like we're eating, and we're spitting out, and you eat the food that's been chewed already. So you don't have to worry about chewing, right? This is what we're doing. It's like a blender. Long words go rattling by us like long railway trains. Who wants to sit by a long trains and look at it until the end? If it's too long, drive by the rail, a rail cross when you're at the road, and if the train is long, you lose patience. This is the idea that he's thinking that this is why modern thinkers are so complicated in their worlds. Because, okay, you don't want to hear it. It's like, okay, I accept it. We know they are carrying thousands who are too tired and too indolent to walk and think for themselves. So the idea being is that if you don't want to wait for the train to pass, get on it. Get with the program. That's the idea. And I think he's right. So I'm going to have some fun a little bit because I want to show, I read some of the books, not all of the books, so I know what I'm talking about. And by saying I think there is no arguments, I can, if you don't agree with me, for those who read the book, we can talk about that. But really, I think there is no argument. And I think what's happening, I'm going to show you this. This is a very famous picture. I don't know if you heard of that campaign. Richard Dawkins was, especially in London first, he actually paid some post signs to put on buses. It happened in France, it happened in Barcelona and other places in the world, but it originated in London. And to say that, there's probably no God, no stop worrying and enjoy your life. So, it reminds me of this verse. This is why I put it here, Jeremiah 5:12. They have lied about the Lord. They said, he will do nothing. No harm will come to us. We will never see sword or famine. Meaning that, If there is no God, then we're fine. We're good to go. So what I liked about this, and this is the fun part, is the very idea of the campaign shows the idea behind it, the agenda behind it. They now are voicing their opinions stronger. I mean, a few years ago, those campaigns would never have been on the street. And the idea is that now they are strong enough, they are known enough. I mean, Richard Dawkins is a celebrity for his books and not for his science. He's a scientist. But his books on science, like The Selfish Gene, for example, is very much debated among scientists. Philosophers, who are atheists like him. The scientists who are scientists don't really agree with him. Not that he's a bad scientist, but normally people are saying, and it's funny because sometimes he criticizes. I read a book from David Berlinski, and I will quote him later, but he thinks that David Berlinski should not be listened to because he never contributed anything to science, and David Berlinski is a scientist. Well, the question I ask is, what did he contribute to in science to say that to David Berlinski, for example? The reason why he can say that, because nobody is going to argue with him. He's known. The celebrity is based on how much book he sold, not how much he contributed to science. Unlike Sam Harris, who actually is a great scientist in his field. So, what does it take to have a good argument? Number one, you need a celebrity, right? You need Richard Dawkins. Number two, you need the center of attention, like a commercial. What is this woman doing here? I don't know. Maybe she's kind of the attractive side of the campaign. I don't know what she's doing there, but she's doing something here. But number three, look at what he says. There is probably no God. I think for a new scientist, for a guy who is a horseman of the revelation, I think he's not bold enough. Why do you think there is probably no God? To me, this is the strongest statement, and this is what I use when I met people who says, yeah, but like in Paris we had that. So we would point to the sign and say, what's the problem with this? I don't know, there is no God. I think we should enjoy our life. But don't you think that if I would be that, convinced to put up a sign on the wall, I should get rid of the word probably? If it's that true, if it's that sure, if you really think that there is no God, get rid of the word probably. Why would you have this word? This is what I mean by the idea that they don't have a strong argument. They are not sure even themselves about what they're saying. And you remember what we said yesterday. The reason why people are violent many times when they defend a position is because they are not sure about their own positions. The best way, because let's think about this. I am Richard Dawkins. And I think he believes what he thinks, but in a way, not enough to say that there is no God, but to say that there is probably no God. So if I am one day, how much do I have to lose as a Richard Dawkins if one day I get convicted that God exists? Everything. My reputation, what this guy is doing. I'm going to be humiliated because I'm actually accepting the very thing I debated for 40 years. So if I am not sure, I have to be strong. I have to be violent, and I have to use rhetoric instead of arguments to make sure that my points go across. And if I've listened to debates, I don't know if you did, but if you listen to Christopher Hitchens, he has a reputation of never losing any of his debate with people. But when you think about this, on the one hand, this is right. He never lost any debate because he's a great speaker, and he has amazing rhetoric skills. So he knows how to manage a debate. He knows that. But on the argument level, you slow down, you put the pros and cons. He lost it. Most of the time. Not every time, though. But most of the time, he lost all of his debates because he doesn't have strong arguments. Remember what we said yesterday when he was asked the questions. If you find yourself in a dark alley one night, you are changing your tire and you find a group of gang of guys, big guys with tattoos coming your way, would you be relieved to know that they come out of the Bible study? And he said, I would not be relieved. That's a lie. I mean, everybody would be relieved to know that these guys are Christians that are coming your way, and they're coming your way to help you, not for any other reason, because they are Christians. So They have to lie. They have to come up with arguments that are not strong arguments. I'm not saying that it's not worth spending time to know what they're saying to address it, because those who believe that they have strong arguments really believe what they're saying. So for me to think, for example, that Sam Harris doesn't have a point, I need to think it through. Why did I say that he doesn't have a point? Because his assumption. He believes that man is only material. That's an assumption that cannot be proved. So I need to think this through and explain it to somebody who is not thinking about this. So I need to spend time thinking of the arguments. I do. But the idea is that to think that it's okay, now I'm going to spend my life studying these guys because they actually have great argument. This is a false understanding of arguments. An argument, if it's sound and valid, then what it is proving is false. This is it. So if Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and any other guy have a strong argument, valid and sound against Christianity, then we can throw our Bibles away. I don't believe they have one, because they can't have one. You cannot have an argument that stands against truth. There has to be some kind of trick somewhere, and this is what we're talking about. Is there any question about this?
It sounds a little bit like, just to play the devil's advocate, it sounds a little bit like you have a different position. I mean,
Presupposition?
yeah. I mean, just playing devil's advocate.
Yes.
Your argument's true because it has to be true.
Yes. And, okay, let's talk about this. And I think you're totally right. The difference between a Christian and a non-Christian is that the Christian accepts the idea that he has presuppositions and he has to have one. The non-Christian thinks he's objective. So I do agree, but the reason, and then we spoke about this yesterday, we had a few discussions with a few people, and think the only way for a man to be objective is to be God. Because for me to actually own truth in an objective way, I need to be the ultimate knower. I need to be the one that has all knowledge. Since I don't have all knowledge, I have to have a finite argument. People thinking we don't want to accept any circular reasoning. I think there is no other way for men to think outside of circular reasoning. Because at some point, I need to find some kind of ultimate authority outside of me that I need to assume that it is the ultimate authority. Because if I am not God, I cannot be the ultimate authority, right? And if I am not God, I don't have all knowledge. And if I don't have all knowledge, I need to rely on something else that I have to trust at some point. Rationalists trust on reason. Empiricists trust on science. Skepticism trust on themselves to be skeptics, which they are skeptic about everything but their own skepticism. But the idea is that I need to acknowledge the fact that as a Christian that I do have presuppositions, but I have to. This is the very idea of finitude in man. If I am a finite human being, then I will have to think in a circular reasoning. So, and I know I'm touching like a touchy debate because among apologists, not everybody agree on that. But to me, to think about this, and if you have any idea and you come to me and you correct me, but how can a man who is finite think outside of a circle? And what I mean by that is, I'm not saying that my arguments need to be circular. My arguments need to be valid and sound. They cannot be circular. But at some point, what I'm laying my argument on has to be an authority that is beyond me, that I have to trust to be the final authority. So I am ultimately thinking in a circular reasoning. I have to.
You want to be an apologist, you make choices on very many levels.
Yes.
Like you have to make character choices, and you have to like face the battle, and you really have to come out of yourself in your character.
Yes.
The idea that that we have to rely upon this outside data, this revelation, to give us the truth is true. But sometimes I find that we reject that we already have the information in concrete form from God. And we may not. In other words, the information that we have in the Bible is interpretable. It's not a concrete mold that we can that's fixed. It can be interpreted based upon how we read it.
Yes.
Right? So, and I don't see the trend. Therefore I don't see it as one side or the other. It's like both sides have to be correct. We have to accept the parts of science that we see the parts of the real world, the phenomenal world, that we see with our senses, and accept those, and then look back and say that both have to be true. The revelation has to be true. Science, as if it's reproducible and has gotten to a point of theory through repetition of proving the hypothesis has some basis,
Yes.
then I think we have to accept it and then go back and look at the interpretation, and then we can get to more of an absolute truth. And
Yes.
so, and I think if we do that more, like with Genesis 1, I think we can look at it and maybe make the two make more sense together. I don't know if that's kind of a long-winded discussion to say that
Yeah.
maybe we're misinterpreting this concept. And I think the biggest misinterpretation that leads people like Dawkins to say that we're crazy is because you can't dispute this age of the geological age of the world. It's almost impossible to dispute scientifically.
Yeah. Well, I would agree with this, although I am not a scientist, but I think we're going to have Thursday night and Friday night will be science nights. So we're going to have Pastor Mike Klicker and Pastor Phil Norman, who are both scientists, brought up in the discussion. So it would be very interesting maybe to bring those questions up at this point. But I will make just a point that is Thursday night. There is one question that I want to answer: is that can a Christians be a progressive creationist or an evolutionist theist? And my answer is no. And the idea of a geological, age of the Earth is actually another debate. But before I think, just to say this quickly, but before we accept the idea of evolution being so founded, scientifically, there is a few questions, and we go back to what Pastor Pete said about the assumption. What I really said is that I have to agree that I have presuppositions, and I need to show the unbeliever that he does have presuppositions. And if he thinks that he knows conclusively, he needs to show why he knows conclusively. Like we spoke about the scientist who excludes the idea that God could be the origin of the universe because it's not scientific. The reason he's making an assumption is that everything that is not scientific cannot be proven. Well, I am married to my wife, and this is the proof. This is not science. This is my ring. This is my vows. This is witnesses. There is many things outside the realm of science. So he's making many assumptions, and this is what I'm talking presuppositions. The difference between him and I is because I'm making presuppositions that does make sense, and he's making presuppositions because he's suppressing the truth. Now, going back to science, I think before, and that's the way, I am not a scientist, and this is why I'm working when I'm talking with scientists on this philosophy of science rather than science, because it's beyond my reach. What I am saying, though, is that I'm trying to show that you are telling me that God cannot be the origin of the universe because it's an assumption. But if evolution is so founded, why are the 3 or 4 most important component of the idea of evolution's never been proved or reproduced? Like, for example, the life would come from non-life. We were never able to do that. And that's a major point of origin for evolution to be true. We've never seen any evolution, a microevolution, macroevolution happen. We've never seen that. And for both of them, actually, you don't even have experiments that are conducted today to try to prove it. It's so much an assumption that is contrary to what we know in science, but it still is an assumption that we cannot reproduce, and we don't even work on it. We don't even have teams in the world working on those things, trying to prove it, because it's been accepted as assumptions. So I'm not saying that I'm debating the idea. That would be Thursday night, Friday night. What I'm saying is that if you can have so many assumptions on so many important things, you should not be, as Richard Dawkins, so strong by saying, these guys, they are insane, they are wicked, or whatever. Because you're making so many assumptions that you cannot prove. That troubles me in many ways. So I don't think I have to bother of trying to find how to make evolution fit into creation. I don't have to do that because I think you need to answer my questions first. That would be my position. Like I do have questions for you, answer my questions, and if you do answer my questions, then I will be considering your position. And I've done that. And I said earlier, I have many scientists in my family, and I did ask the questions. And not that I'm picky, but I've never received any answer that would fit. And I'm talking about non-Christian scientists, and who are directly, connected with the idea of evolution, because one is an astrophysicist and the other one is a biologist. So I think they know what they're talking about, but they don't know how to answer those basic questions. But those basic questions are basic assumptions also for evolution to work. So that I think I'm confident that I don't have to worry about my position so far. Not that I want to be rude or anything, but I'm just saying if you are that rude, I'm talking to Richard Dawkins, to me, thinking I'm insane, I'm mad, or maybe wicked, even though you would rather not think this way, I think you're pretty strong. And to say there is probably no God, you're making a point for me. And not answering my questions about the assumption you have, you're making a point for me too. So I don't think you should be that confident. And I don't think I should lose my confidence also. That's what I'm saying about it. Andy, and then Pastor Arto.
You just kind of gave like a history of a lot of different men, and it seems orchestrated, right? Like if there were phases, if the devil had a plan, he did a good job, right? I saw a video. I think it was Hitchens and Dawkins in the back of a limo, being transported somewhere or whatever, and they were talking about if they had like one left creationist, theist, believer, what would they do with him? Would they get rid of him or would they let him stay? And if you've seen this, and Hitchens pretty much said he'd let him stay, like he enjoys it. He enjoys the battle, and like this is almost like a hobby for him. And Dawkins was like so perplexed by his answer and said like, get rid of him. He is a curse upon man, And that's the new atheism today. I don't know what it is, but maybe you could just speak about like, how do these men feel in this position? Do they feel like puppets? Do they ask themselves this question, why am I so persuaded and yet self-contradictory? Or do they really feel like their worldview is homogeneous enough?
Yeah. I think they really think that their worldview is fine. I do think so. But in the same times, you cannot escape God's testimony in your heart. And it's the same for them. They know that God exists according to Romans 1, and they know as much as you do. And so some people sometimes ask me, how would you approach, an atheist? How would you approach a Muslim? I think I approach everyone as a non-believer. Because they all know that I know that all of them need God, and this is what I'm concerned with. And they all are under the power of the Holy Spirit to be convicted, according to John 16:8. So no one can escape God's testimony. It's not possible. So when they hit the pillow at night and they cannot sleep, they think, just like you and I. So I trust God that He actually does the work in their heart. So it doesn't mean anything if somebody is violent on TV. They have to do that. I mean, we know that somebody the very idea of real TV. It's like we see people in some place living a real life. There is a script behind it. The idea is to make the audience go up. And I think those guys, the way they write, the way they're saying things, is because if I am violent, if I say things, if I am attacking things, I will sell more books. I don't know how much of what they write they really believe 100%. I don't know. I mean, that would be up to them to answer. Maybe he should come next classes. I don't know. Pastor Arto?
Yeah, I had a small comment about that. Reading and observing these writers, it is so obvious that like a whole weight of the secular Western world is like really on their shoulders to do their job.
Yes.
Like we have millions and millions of educated people who are trusting them to really be what they are now today. And they certainly feel the pressure, I'm sure, and that's like one of the part why they are so aggressive. And like reading some of that material, I just cannot help but get the sense of that they are wishing so hard that they are right.
Yes.
They are wishing so hard that it just clouds their common sense.
Yes.
And they are not ready. Like you say, like fairness is gone. Like the other side of that, like they are not ready personally anymore face even consideration of the opposite side.
Yes.
Because they are fixed in that posture. They are frozen in this posture against God, and that's like their last stand. They are like their rest of their lives, they are living their last stand of like civilization against God, and in a way, like if you get poetic, you really can smell the breath of the dragon, like in their spirit, so to say.
Yeah, it's true. And the idea again is, remember we said about the attitude, we're not trying to be mean in a sense, because I think we need to show the attitude of Christ in any circumstances. But the point is, if you take Richard Dawkins that we quoted earlier, is that how can you be so confident in a theory where you don't have any way to back it up? How can you be confident when you're not able to answer the basic assumptions that you're making? And how can you cannot prove that? And it shows with the picture we had earlier, about Richard Dawkins saying that there is probably no God. And for a writer like him, who wrote extensively against Christianity, I would think that I don't need the word probably. And he does need the word because he's not sure about this. And but when you think about this, it's easy for us to look at the guy like him and hate the guy for what he is. But if I meet him in the street one day, how am I going to behave with him? Well, maybe he's trapped. I don't know, just make a quick survey. How many of us, I'll ask you a sincere answer, how many of you, and me included, have done something just because we wanted to please someone? I've done it. And is that a good motivation? No, it's not. And all of us almost raised the hand. He's included. So what he's doing maybe in his life, maybe I don't know. Maybe right now it's the afternoon if he's in London, he's thinking about God. I don't know. And I pray that he would. And the fact that he writes probably just gives me a hint that the guy is not so sure about that. So the idea is that when I approach a guy like him, or if I approach a Muslim, or if I approach a Mormon of anyone, what I'm seeing is a lost person. I'm not seeing an enemy. I'm seeing someone who needs Christ. And whatever the need is, I preach the gospel. Remember, we concluded yesterday. I preach the gospel. Now the questions will be different from Richard Dawkins than they would be from Muslim. The answers will be different, but the coming back to the preaching of the gospel will be the same. That's what we need to keep. And so we draw a picture of atheism in its history. Now people are thinking, and we heard that, I don't know if it's, we had the case in Maryland, but we had a case in France also, that we had gay marriage voted. In France, it's been, I think, a week ago, or maybe 10 days ago. And now we think as Christians, and it's easy to think, well, the devil is at work, and then we can say it's getting worse, and and it's true in a way. That look at him, Richard Dawkins is thinking that if he had his way, then he would, basically get rid of all the Christian parents that are teaching creationism. The world is getting worse and worse. But you know what? The darker the night, the brighter the light. Meaning that it's okay for us, because if the devil is at work, so he's God. God is also at work. So if you dim the light, let's say that somebody goes there and then we dim the light, the only one that actually will be able to see, that we will be able to see, is the one who has his flashlight with him. So you might have, Andy, your flashlight on, but it's meaningless because there is so much light. But take the light away, and he's going to be precious. And I think it's the same. People who want that pleasure in life, they want to go down the road. They want to be, heading towards hedonism. They want that. But once they get it, and they get down, and they don't have any pleasure, really, then they will go back to us. They will go back to the gospel. So I think the darker the night, the brighter the light for us. So I don't think we need to be discouraged by the world, the way it's going. It's going the way God wants it to go. It's funny because think about prophecy. Well, if prophecy is going to happen, and it's going to happen, why should I complain about this? Why should I fight against this? Oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to vote against this. Oh, of course, we are citizens, and in our country, we want, if we have children especially, and for the benefit of our society and citizens, we want a better country that has biblical principle. But once the biblical principle is gone, then we're going to a darker night, and the darker night means brighter for the light. So if we are lights in the world, then it's going to be okay. So I don't think we should be, so concerned with the world going down. It's actually good news, because if you read the book of Judges, every time the people were in captivity, they turned to God. Every time. And we know that it's the same for for the world. No, if we are going down, then if the world's going down, it's basically good news for us, right? So now we went through the history of atheism quickly. What I would like to do is ask questions. What should we do? I mean, does that mean that we need to change the way we see apologetics? And I think it does in a way. And I want to quote here Alistair McGrath, who I really recommend. He's a British apologist. He's a professor of philosophy. He has a PhD in biology and a PhD in philosophy. And he's a professor at King's College in London. And he was in Cambridge or Oxford before? I don't know. He was, I mean, he's a great scholar, and he has a great reputation in his country. And this is what he says. Christianity is rarely understood by those outside its bounds. In fact, this is probably one of the greatest tasks confronting the apologists, to rescue Christianity from misunderstandings. And I think this is right. The reason why this is happening, there is several reasons why. Number one, because of the de-Christianization of the West, Christian countries. People today don't go to church like they used to. They just don't know. So people don't know. So we are facing people that think they have an answer, but they never really process the answer they have. So what I mean by that, look, in France, at least, when you meet some people, I don't know if you know that, but in France, philosophy is mandatory in high school. Like, in France, you can major when you go to high school. Here, you major in college, but in France, you can major. You have 3 majors in high school. You can major in philosophy, you can major in literature, and you can major in science. But when you major in science, which you think you would not need philosophy, still you have 4 to 6 hours of philosophy every week. Now, if you major in literature, then you have 12 to 15 hours of philosophy every week. So we teach you how to think. This is what they're saying. We teach you how to think by yourself, but actually we are telling you how you should think, right? Because I don't know who had philosophy in high school and college, but actually if you want to succeed in philosophy, I remember my first class of philosophy was interesting. My professor said, I'm here to help you how to think by yourself. So I'm thinking, this is great. I'm going to think by myself for the first time ever. I'm looking forward to that. And actually I found out that it was a trick. Because the only way for me to succeed in my essays that I wrote is when he asked us questions, is to answer with the outline he gave me. So if you give me the outline with the answer, then I'm not thinking by myself. Now, if you want extra points, you can also. You have to quote people that you read. So actually you're telling me to succeed in philosophy, I need to answer what you're telling me, and I need to add what other things, not me. So I am taught to know things, and we go back to what we said yesterday, the difference between knowledge and intelligence. I am taught how to know things, but know how to process what I know. And the first time when I meet people in the street, when you and I meet people in the street, and I'm actually confronting them with maybe it's the first time they will have to process what they know. And they will conclude that maybe what they know is not true. And this is what he's saying. People know things about Christianity because they heard it. Maybe they went to a conference with Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens or anything, and they think they figured it out. Now you come and you talk with them, and then they find out that what they think they knew about you, they don't. Alistair McGrath wrote a book on several books about Richard Dawkins. One of them is the answer to Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion. He wrote the Dawkins Delusion. And the other book that he wrote is about the Dawkins God. And it actually shows that the understanding that Dawkins has of God is not at all the understanding that we have of God. So he's depicting a God that doesn't look like the one we believe in. So we actually taught that this is what Christians believe, but this is not what we believe at all. So it will be a shock for people to know that. So we need to clear that misunderstanding. Number 2, because of the attack against Christianity, as we said, people have been depicted like a straw man to be cast down, meaning that they are showing who God is, and obviously look at him. This God doesn't make sense. And actually, I agree with Dawkins. The God that he's depicting does not make any sense. But I don't care because this is not my God. That's a different one. And number 3, this is the same for religious countries. Because Catholic countries, for example, where people had a bad image of God, or a Muslim country where people have a wrong understanding of what Christianity really is. I mean, if you ask Muhibi will tell you that when you meet Muslims, most of them, they think they know what Christianity is, and they really actually discover what you believe for the first time when you talk to them. They have their own understanding of what Christianity is, and we have a lot of Muslims in France, and when you meet them in the street, they actually are surprised to know what you believe. They don't have the same understanding. And when you talk about Trinity, or when you talk about Jesus being the Son of God, we have a very different understanding of what it means. So people don't know what we believe. This is what I have a quote from Mark Twain that Pastor Steve spoke about Monday. Mark Twain once defined faith as believing what you know and so. And this is not at all what we believe. Actually, if we go back to what the comment from Pastor Arthur earlier, this applies to Richard Dawkins, not to me. He lives in faith because he's not sure that evolution can be true for sure. As a scientist, he has to know that he makes unproven assumptions. He has to know that. So he believes by faith in evolution more than I do believe by faith, the way he understands faith. And Mark Twain was wrong by thinking that faith is that. But faith is that when you're a non-Christian. And this is what Chesterton said. Whenever we feel there is something odd in Christian theology, we shall generally find there is something odd in truth. And what he means by that is that when people will find that what you're saying is weird, but actually truth is weird when you're a madman. Remember what we said about the madman yesterday? He has homogeneity in his thinking. He thinks he's got it. It's weird. Somebody who will not run when there is a pink elephant in the house. This is weird. Yeah, but truth is weird. There is no pink elephant in the house, as we said yesterday. So this is what we need to bring up to people, is that we need to understand that you feel there is something wrong with my theology. It's maybe because you don't have it right, you don't know what I'm thinking, and number two, because there is something wrong with the truth, according to you. And this is what we need to do. So I want to move on a little bit, maybe with defining what we believe, really. I think many people, and this is what we need to clear as a misunderstanding, people don't know what we mean by we have faith. And actually, many Christians don't even know what it means to live by faith. I'm talking, including me. I think sometimes I have a wrong idea of what faith is. I believe that faith is actually what Mark Twain says in my life. I'm at the edge of the cliff and I'm just jumping to the cliff. Well, that's presumption. Faith only is faith when I hear from God and I act upon it. If I act upon my own thinking, this is presumption. Faith is actually hearing from God. Now, does it make it stupid? No. If God exists and He tells me to do something and I obey, this is reasonable, right? If God exists, He tells me to do something and I do it, that makes sense to me. This is reasonable. This is faith. Faith is hearing from God and acting upon it. And look at how the author of Hebrews defined faith. He's saying, I think he's using very strong words. He's saying that faith is a substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. Those two words are very strong. I mean, evidence and substance are very strong words in the New Testament. Substance is the word that is used 5 times in the New Testament, and it's actually translated many times by steadfastness. Something that is steadfast. I think it's the opposite of what people think faith is. What makes our faith reasonable is because there is a God behind it. If there is no one behind my faith, then that faith is stupid. What brings the content to what I do in my life? The reason why I believe in miracles is not because I'm thinking some kind of magic world. It's because I think there is a God behind the world that created the world, and if God exists, then miracles are possible. This is what we call reasonable. And living by faith is a different view of reason. Your reason is actually thinking that it's its own ultimate authority. A rationalist thinks that his reason has the final say on everything. That is unfounded, that is an assumption, and it's quite pride also. It's proud to think that my reason is actually the final authority of everything. So when you lay down some things on me, and I make a decision and I assess truth, I am making a statement that I don't even realize. I am the final authority who says what is right and what is wrong, what is true and what is false. This is amazing. I mean, are you sure you can do that? I mean, do you have all knowledge to actually say, I'm good, there is no God, I'm good to go? How do you know that? That is quite a bold statement for people to say that there is no God. Are you all-knowing? I mean, do you have all knowledge? Did you go all over the universe and you found out that there was no God? Do you know all that? So the reasoning, the rationalism, having reason as the final authority, that's a bold statement. You see, that's something very bold that we don't say as Christians. I say my reason is not big enough. My God is big enough. This is why I live by faith. And that makes sense. I am limited. I can have an unlimited life because I have an unlimited God. That makes sense. That makes sense to me. So the substance is something that you find 5 times in New Testament, and evidence also is a word that you find. Actually, it's the only one you find this word in the Bible is right here. And actually, this is very interesting. In the ancient Greek, the word for evidence was used as a proof. Like means something that can be proven or tested. Actually, faith in the ancient Greek, the word that was used to define faith as evidence was something that was empirical. That's very interesting. Actually, the true empiricism is Christian, and faith is the only way to go. Meaning that my faith has substance and it has evidence. Means I have proofs, I have empirical evidence. And think about this. When Abraham was asked by God to sacrifice Isaac, so he goes up the mountains. But before he goes up to the mountain, at the bottom of the mountain, he asks his servants to stay. And what does he tell them? Wait for us. We will come down, not I will come down. But he's going up to sacrifice his son. Well, his faith is based on something that is beyond the actual moment. His faith is based on who God is. God told me I will have a son. I had one, but he said, not this one, Isaac. So I have this son now, and this is the son through which God will accomplish his promise. It's not another son he will give me after. And Hebrews actually 11 tells us that Abraham believed that God was strong enough to resurrect him from the dead. So Abraham goes up in faith. He heard from God, he acts upon it, and by doing this, then he actually says, we will come down. And when his son Isaac asked him the questions, okay, here's the fire, here's the wood, where's the sacrifice? What does Abraham answer? God will provide himself a sacrifice. So he lives by faith. But the faith seems to be irrational. Actually, Søren Kierkegaard is one of the Christian existentialist philosophers, said that actually this is a leap of faith that explains faith. This is outside of reason. This is unethical. God asking you to do something, this is what he called faith. But no, this is totally reasonable. Because so far, every time God spoke to me, every time he said something, he did it. So if he said that through this son I will have a descendant, this son will be the one. So if I kill him, God will resurrect him. This is faith. And it's based on God's character and content, not based on something that I wish. It's not wishful thinking again. It's okay? So we need to move on a little bit. Where are we now? Mark Twain. Not Mark Twain. Okay, so let's read first 2 Peter, 2 Peter, first one. 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 16. This is what Peter thinks. He says, we have not followed cunningly devised fables when we made known unto you the power and coming of the Lord Jesus Christ, but we're eyewitnesses of his majesty. What Peter says here is actually, our faith is based on evidence. We have evidence of what we believe. I have proofs to back it up. So, this is what Greg Benson said. Greg Benson, he's an apologist. He's dead, but he wrote a lot of books that are very interesting. This is what he said. The scope of faith, then, is not the horizon of what human hopes dictate credible, right? Rather, the man of faith submits to the a priori dependability of God's word, just as Abraham did in obeying the command to sacrifice his only son after he had received him according to the promise. Meaning that faith is not a wishful thinking. Faith is obedience, and that makes sense. I mean, think about this. Does it make sense? That's what I say to non-Christians sometimes. Okay, let's, for the sake of the argument, come with me on the Christian ground. I believe there is a God. You believe there is a God, you're a Christian too. God speaks to me and I obey according to what he says. Does that make sense? Yeah, of course, on your ground it makes sense. Yeah, that's the point. It's on my ground. So, do you understand that this is what the Bible calls faith? Yeah, I understand that. So, is faith the opposite of reason? Well, not on your ground. No, this is what we're talking about. The faith on my ground is not what you think faith is. Your idea of faith is the opposite of reason. I'm just having a different kind of reason. My reason is not the final authority. Your reason is the final authority. My authority is beyond. And actually, when you think about this, to be a finite man thinking that my reason is the final authority doesn't make any sense. Having somebody over us who is all knowledge and all power, being the final authority, that makes sense. Okay? So, let's talk about what Bernard Ram says. He said that the understanding and formulation of one's doctrine of faith and reason and their respective place are interpreted according to one's own system, meaning that many people will understand what faith and reason are and how they relate depending on their own worldview. So you're thinking as a non-Christian, like this is the way to go. And I'm thinking as a Christian, this is very different. My view of reason is different than your view of reason. My view of faith is very different than your view of faith. And the way they both interact is very much different the way that you think both interact. Okay? So, because for us as Christians, and this is very important, believing is knowing for a Christian. This is not different. Believing is knowing for Christians. What I believe to, in my heart, I know it to be true. It's not two things. It's not like, what Mark Twain said earlier about the faith that you actually believe that faith is knowing what you know not to be true. I think we need to take a break. So I have some other points I want to make, but I'm thinking we need to have a discussion on Chesterton. So let's have a break. It's almost 10:10. Let's have a break for 20 minutes, and then we'll come back here at 10:30.